Around the World Lit Audio. The Stranger by Albert Camus. Part 2, Chapter 2. Full narration script. Channel intro. Welcome to Around the World Lit Audio, the greatest novels ever written, from every corner of the world, in English. New chapter every week, free to listen. Chapter recap. In Part 2, Chapter 1, the trial began. The courtroom was packed in the Algerian summer heat. Witness after witness was asked the same question in different forms. Did Meursault grieve at his mother's funeral? The answer was consistently no. The prosecutor built his case around this absence. Meursault watched the construction of himself from the dock with almost complete detachment and thought, "They are not trying me for what I did. They are trying me for who I am." Part 2, Chapter 2. Chapter 2. The second day of the trial began with more testimony. The heat had not relented. If anything, it had intensified, the courtroom accumulating warmth from the bodies packed into it, and the relentless Algerian sun outside, until the air had the specific quality of something that pressed rather than simply existed around you. The prosecutor called more witnesses about the shooting itself, establishing the sequence of events, the number of shots, the interval between the first shot and the four that followed. He was meticulous about this interval. He returned to it repeatedly, asking various witnesses to confirm that there had been a pause between the first shot and the remaining four, a pause during which Meursault could have stopped, could have reconsidered, could have done something other than what he did. The defense objected to the emphasis. The judge allowed it to continue. The prosecutor's argument, as it developed across the testimony, was this: the first shot might have been an accident, a reflex, a response to the sun and the light, and the immediate threat of the knife. But the four shots that followed were not accidents. They were decisions, made by a man who had time to decide, and who decided to keep firing. Meursault listened to this argument and found that he could not entirely disagree with it. He had not intended to kill the Arab, but he had fired for more times after the first shot, and he could not explain why except that the sun had been very strong and something had happened that he did not have a name for. This was not an explanation that satisfied a courtroom. He understood this. He did not have a better one to offer. His lawyer attempted to argue self-defense, that Meursault had been threatened with a knife, that the shooting was a response to genuine danger. This argument had some merit, but it was undermined by the four additional shots, which were difficult to characterize as defensive once the immediate threat had presumably been neutralized by the first. The trial moved toward its conclusion. The prosecutor rose to deliver his closing argument. It was, by any technical standard, an extraordinary piece of rhetoric. He began with the facts of the case: the shooting, the victim, the circumstances on the beach. He moved from there to character, to the funeral, to the coffee and the cigarettes at the vigil, to the cinema the next day, to Marie, to the letter Meursault had written for Raymond. He wove these threads together into a single portrait, a man without natural feeling, without the basic human responses that bind a person to their family and their community, a man whose moral emptiness had made the murder not an aberration, but an expression of his fundamental character. He said, "This man buried his mother with the indifference of a stranger. He celebrated her death the following day with comedy and romance. He assisted in the exploitation of a vulnerable woman without a flicker of conscience. And when he held a gun on a beach, with no immediate threat requiring it, he fired 5 times into another human being with the same indifference he had shown at his mother's graveside." He said, "I ask you, gentlemen of the jury, to consider what kind of man this is. Consider whether a man who feels nothing at his mother's death is capable of feeling anything at all, including remorse, including the basic human recognition of what he has taken from another man's family." He said, "This man is, in the fullest sense, a moral stranger to the society in which he lives. I ask for the maximum penalty the law allows." The courtroom was very quiet when he finished. Meursault's lawyer rose to make his closing argument. He attempted to humanize his client, to present him as an ordinary man who had made a tragic mistake under extreme circumstances, a hard-working employee, a person without prior history of violence. He argued that the prosecution had conflated two separate matters, Meursault's character and Meursault's actions on the beach, and that the jury's duty was to judge the latter, not the former. It was a competent argument. It did not have the force of the prosecutor's. Meursault, listening to both, understood why. The prosecutor had told a story, a complete, coherent, emotionally satisfying story about who Meursault was, and what that meant. His own lawyer had offered facts and qualifications, which were true but were not a story, and stories are what juries remember. The judge gave his instructions to the jury. They retired to deliberate. Meursault was taken back to a holding room to wait. He sat in the small room, and thought about what had been said. He thought about the prosecutor's phrase, "a moral stranger." He turned it over in his mind, and found that he did not entirely object to it, though he objected to the implication that being a stranger to the conventional emotional responses of his society made him a monster. He was a stranger. He had always been a stranger to his mother's death, to Mary's love, to Raymond's friendship, to the whole apparatus of feeling that other people seemed to operate with such fluency. He had never pretended otherwise. He had never performed grief he did not feel, or joy he did not feel, or remorse he did not feel. This honesty, it turned out, was the thing that was going to kill him. He found this almost interesting, the specific interest of a man observing the precise mechanism of his own destruction, with a clarity that the destruction itself had not diminished. The jury returned after several hours. Meursault was brought back into the courtroom. The room was full again, the heat the same, the particular quality of anticipation that fills a room when a verdict is about to be delivered. The foreman of the jury stood. He announced the verdict. Meursault listened to the words with the specific detachment that had characterized his entire experience of the trial, present, attentive, and somehow at a distance from himself, as though he were watching the proceedings happen to someone who shared his name, but was not entirely him. The verdict was guilty. The sentence was death, execution by guillotine, in the public square, at a time to be determined. Meursault heard this and felt, for a moment, nothing at all. Then, as he was led from the courtroom, he felt something arrive that he had not expected, not fear exactly, not yet, but a kind of clarity, the specific clarity of a man who has just learned the precise shape of the time remaining to him, and is beginning, for the first time, to understand what that shape requires him to think about. He was taken back to his cell. He sat on his cot, and looked at the wall and began, for the first time in his life, to think seriously about death, not as an abstraction, not as something that happened to other people in distant futures, but as a specific event with a specific date, that was now, somehow, approaching him with the particular inevitability of all specific events. He had 11 months to think about it. He began that night. Chapter Transition. You have reached the end of Part 2, Chapter 2 of The Stranger, by Albert Camus. In Chapter 3, Meursault settles into the specific psychology of a man awaiting execution. He thinks about escape, about the various impossible ways a person in his position imagines escaping, what cannot be escaped. He thinks about his appeal, which he does not expect to succeed and which he pursues anyway, because the alternative to hope, however thin, is a kind of acceptance he is not yet ready to make. Chapter 3 is available next week. Subscribe to Around the World Lit Audio so you never miss a chapter. A new chapter arrives every week.